hologram is from NET, the National Educational Television Network.
Have you committed a burglary?
No.
Or a robbery?
No.
Auto theft?
No.
Shoplifting?
No.
I think the National Data Center, right now, in its early stages, poses a tremendous threat to liberty.
Individual Americans being robbed of their thought by such methods and having their privacy invaded.
Potentially schizophrenic, paranoid. And these records will stay with the child.
The American who has a file on him is an American who is self-conscious and worried about how he leads his life.
The right to talk, the right not to talk, the right to choose, the individual to choose the people to whom he will talk, when he will talk, the things he will talk about, the views that he has that he wants to share with other people, the questions he will ask. This is the heart of what I consider to be the right of privacy.
This baby is just 1 second old. Here in the delivery room of Mount Sinai Hospital in New York, he has just won his first fight, the fight to life. Many other battles await him in the years to come. Most are common to all mankind and have been through the ages. But this newborn boy and all the others of his generation face a new and serious battle which they may not win. The right to be let alone. The right to privacy. His parents allowed our cameras to film his birth. His footprints are taken for identification. He is still less than a minute old, and this is his first record. He is also given a tag with a number which corresponds to one given his mother. His file has begun. When this baby is a young man celebrating his 17th birthday, the year will be 1984. Will his 1984 be the world that George Orwell foresaw? A world stripped of privacy? A world watched by Big Brother? Or will this child have what Justice Brandeis at the turn of the century labeled our inalienable right? The right to enjoy life. The right to privacy. His birth certificate already contains private information, race and color. The hospital must provide this information to the Department of Health. It is considered confidential material. As he grows, so will his files. He will be subjected to an increasing succession of questions, and his answers will be reduced to punch cards, rows of type, and magnetic tape. More and more files. How many are necessary? How many will invade his privacy and be used against him and do him harm? Many people have passed through this hospital for one reason or another, from the removal of a cyst to a serious mental breakdown. Each has left his own record. There are 500,000 individual files stored here, and like most medical files in hospitals throughout the country, they are an open book to insurance companies checking on their applicants. But the flow of facts doesn't stop there, for the insurance companies work hand in hand with the credit companies who investigate for them. And the government has its own information gathering network. The hospital is just one source of personal information. But it is in the school that the invasion of privacy directly confronts an individual. Martin Gross, who wrote The Brain Watchers, describes it.
Well, in a school, there's a new breed of man. There's a guidance counselor who was often a woman. And when I went to school, the guidance counselor was someone who helped you pick a vocation, whether you were suited to be an engineer or a carpenter or a secretary or go on to college. But today, the guidance counselor is a pseudo-psychologist. Person takes courses in psychometrics and in testing, and has this little child and views the child not just as someone who she can advise and help, which was the purpose of the situation, but views the child as a psychological subject, someone you can give a test like the Minnesota Counseling Inventory, or the California Test of Personality, or the Mooney Problem Checklist. And this kind of test probes into the mind of the child and delves into the home environment. They ask questions such as, do you like your mother and father? Do your parents get along? Is your home quarrelsome? Is their home too dirty so that you don't want to bring your friends home? Does mommy and daddy like your sister or brother more than you? Are you nervous about menstruation? Are you nervous about boys? Do you think you're going to have a good sex life? And it probes, and it does this at every level. The questions are set so that the 7-year-old can answer a problem checklist, so that a adjustment inventory can be given to a 12-year-old where they start talking about boys and sex and dating. And when it gets to the college level, at some colleges they have a Mooney Problem Checklist where they ask the college freshman, are you thinking about suicide? Now, this kind of question, when given to a student in the 4th or 5th grade, begins the early conditioning of the child into what we can call confessionals. That is, he's used to the concept of probing himself for public use, so that later on in life, if he's given a personality test in industry, or people ask him an excessive number of questions when he applies for a job, or a file is being built on him on his entire life structure, he's been conditioned to accept this as normal rather than as being totalitarian, which it is. The parents generally do not know that the tests are being given, and I quote a school administrator who says, it is not the general policy of our school to inform the parents as to the testing program within the school. They think that's the province of the school. Well, we parents think that the province of the school is to educate our children, not to use them as guinea pigs in untested psychological experiments.
Probing personality with tests is more and more popular with industry and government. Individuals have to fill in the blanks, often to highly personal questions about sex and religion, on an assortment of tests. These tests are so widely used that the Psychological Corporation of America, which publishes many of them, grossed $3 million last year selling booklets and answer sheets to a multitude of psychologists at schools, in industry, and in government. The Peace Corps of the government is a big user, giving the popular Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory to applicants. Dr. Al Karp, Director of Selection for the Peace Corps, says the government uses tests to ensure that the individual is able to cope with the conditions he will face overseas. Last month, the Senate passed a bill to protect the privacy of government employees, marking Congress's first attempt to deal with the problem legislatively. The bill was sponsored by Senator Ervin of North Carolina.
Oh, I got interested in this subject several years ago as a chairman of the subcommittee on constitutional rights because of the numerous complaints we received from federal employees about the tyrannies being in practice upon them by the executive branch of the government. They were asked on various tests, psychological tests, very insulting questions. And they had a medical questionnaire they were required to answer, but we raised so much cane about that, I understand it's now been withdrawn, but I want to show you some of the questions. Now, the man was not only asked about himself, whether he was a sleepwalker, or if a lady, whether she had a vaginal discharge, or whether she'd been treated for female disorder. An applicant was asked whether they'd ever worn contact lenses. And they were asked to answer questions about their father, their mother, their wife, their brothers and their sisters. Whether they'd ever had any of their father, their mother, or the brothers or the sisters or the wife had ever had syphilis, or had hay fever, or whether any of their relatives had committed suicide or been insane, and whether they had any homosexual, these are questions asked to them, whether they had any homosexual tendencies. And they said this, they were trying to ascertain their health, not the health of the employee, but it seems to me they were asking about the health of all of their connections, both the mental health and the physical health, and also some of their bad habits. Then they had, I had this statement made to me by a person who applied for employment at the National Security Agency at Fort Meade, Maryland. He said when he graduated from college, he was asked these questions, among other things. When was the first time you had sexual relations with a woman? How many times have you had sexual intercourse? Have you ever engaged in homosexual activities? Have you ever engaged in sexual activities with an animal? When was the first time you had intercourse with your wife? Did you have intercourse with her before you were married? How many times? This man said he felt so insulted by this, although he was a college graduate, anxious to get employment, that he refused to take employment from the government when he had to submit to such indignities as this. Then we have these so-called psychological tests, which it seems to me are worthless, because any person who has intelligence above the grade of a moron would know what kind of answers he should give to the questions in order to get a job with the government, and how not to answer them if he doesn't want a job with the government. But some of them are very insulting, in my opinion. They ask him about his attitude towards members of his family, about his mother, his attitude towards his mother, his attitude towards his father, his attitude towards his wife. And they ask him such questions as to this, which he has to answer whether it's true or false. My sex life is satisfactory. Evil spirits possess me at times. At times I feel like swearing. And let me make an honest confession here. I don't know whether I can pass this test, because when I found out all of the tyrannies which the executive branch of the federal government is inflicting upon federal employees, I felt like swearing then, and I still feel like swearing.
We asked a psychologist and management consultant, Dr. James Farr, why business felt the need to make psychological evaluations.
As a psychologist, for the last 10 or 12 years, I've had a good deal of experience doing psychological personality evaluations for such companies as CBS, Hercules Powder Company, North Carolina National Bank, Pfizer Chemical, and Shearing Corporation, and many others. I have evaluated both applicants and people already on the job. Now, there has been a great deal of discussion in the papers and elsewhere about increasing invasions of privacy in our society, and I agree that there seems to be an increasing danger of this. I do not agree, however, that personality testing per se constitutes an improper invasion of privacy. Now, what is so private, for instance, about a personality before a man takes a job, in view of the fact that as soon as he's hired, everybody on the job gets to know his personality intimately? And furthermore, his personality then determines, to a large extent, or to an important extent, whether or not he succeeds and how well he succeeds.
But there are hundreds of records that every one of us has filled out, all requiring private information about ourselves, all put in a file somewhere. It's like telling little bits of the story of ourselves to a new person for each new record. But even questionnaires and psychological tests may not be enough for many companies who now make prospective employees submit to a so-called lie detector test before hiring. It's such big business that there are 50 such companies offering lie detector tests listed in the classified directory in New York, 30 in Chicago. Here at 600 South Michigan Boulevard in Chicago is the oldest and one of the largest, John E. Reed and Associates. In these small rooms, this one company gives between 5,000 and 6,000 tests a year, 2,000 of them part of a pre-employment screening.
Okay, just sit perfectly quiet, look right straight ahead.
Do they call you Bill?
Yes, sir.
Are you over 25 years old?
Yes, sir.
This is Bill Mackey, who has applied for a job as a vending machine operator. The examiner is George Lindbergh. This is an actual test.
Did you ever steal any merchandise from a place where you worked?
No, sir.
Are you in Chicago right now?
Yes, sir.
Did you ever steal any money from a place where you worked?
No, sir.
Have you ever been arrested?
No, sir.
Did you ever commit any other crime that I read to you?
No, sir, I haven't.
Did you lie to any of the questions that you answered here today?
No, sir.
Okay, now Bill, that's the end of the first test, so you can just kind of relax a little bit, move around. And did that arm bother you?
Pressure buildup.
Yeah, a little bit of pressure. So you can just kind of sit quiet for a minute, and I'm going to step out for a minute, and I'll be back in about 5 minutes. I want that arm to...
In ancient China, a suspect was required to answer questions with his mouth full of rice. If the rice stayed dry, he was clearly a liar, since the theory was that a liar's salivary glands would dry up out of fear. The modern lie detector is based on similar concepts, though more sophisticated, measuring physiological reactions to guilt with a pneumatic tube around the subject's chest to measure his breathing, and an inflatable rubber cuff wrapped around his arm to measure pulse and blood pressure. Bill Mackey passed the test and was recommended for his job as a vending machine operator. 25 to 30% do not pass. To qualify for a job, these people have been forced to undergo character evaluation and answer personal questions. And, more important, a record has been taken and put on file, a record which may be untrue and do them serious harm. Most polygraph tests are given in a room containing a hidden microphone and a two-way see-through mirror, enabling persons outside the test room to observe and listen to an examination without the examinee's knowledge. Bill Mackey gave us permission to film his test through this two-way mirror, normally used for observation. J. Kirk Barefoot, president of the Polygraph Association, doesn't think tests are an invasion of privacy.
The American Polygraph Association takes the position that a polygraph test is not an invasion of privacy, as the subject taking the test must voluntarily cooperate with the polygraphist. Our association also feels that a confidential polygraph test is the least offensive of any of the current forms of background investigation.
Well, it is voluntary in a technical sense. You don't have to work. You can starve if you want.
Congressman Moss of California.
That's the right of every free American. But if you want a job and you're rather desperate for it, and one of the conditions of pre-employment is that you take this test, then I question how voluntary it is. And here's where I think a citizen is entitled to the protection of the law. The person who wants to make a living is subjected to a polygraph examination where he is giving to persons who could, if they wanted to, engage in a little blackmail racket, highly confidential information. They pry at great length into the most intimate details of your life. And then from time to time, if there's a shortage in a cash drawer or there's a bit of inventory disappears, they're subjected again to this same invasion of their privacy.
The polygraph,
George Lindbergh, the examiner.
on the same token, protects the privacy of the individual that's being tested. If he has engaged in criminal activity or employment theft, it goes no further than this office, and we simply make a judgment that he is not suitable for a position of trust, and that's the end of it, you see. So it's a twofold thing. We protect the privacy of the individual, and we arrive at an accurate determination for the employer.
From the mail I receive, I would say that there is an alarming growth in the use of these devices. And all you need really to set yourself up as a polygraph operator in most jurisdictions is the money to buy a machine and the ability to read an instruction booklet. And then you can determine whether the person you're interrogating is telling the truth or telling a lie. Of course, the most expert in this field, those highly trained physicians in neurology and physiology and psychology and psychiatry, they can't tell. But give a man an instruction book or a week's instruction, and he can tell definitely whether you're telling the truth or telling a lie.
Here are the experiences of two people with the polygraph.
Just out of the Army and looking for a job. And I applied for a job with one of the security agencies here in the city. Everything seemed to be in order, and I was asked to take a lie detector test in lieu of waiting 3 to 6 months for security clearance. And I agreed and was taken to a small office with a little man in it. And he strapped me up and connected me to his machine and asked a series of questions, including, I think, 3 having to do with homosexual acts. During the past 5 years, have you participated in any homosexual act? I think that another question was, during the past 5 years, have you been tempted to participate in any homosexual act? And if I'm not mistaken, another question was dealt with just any unnatural sex act. They were close together, but I think they were interspiced by rather harmless questions. I denied these. He pointedly returned to them, I think, twice, and then told me in a tone of voice which indicated he was very disappointed in me that I was lying, hiding things, and possibly or probably was a homosexual. I was denied the possibility of getting the position because this functionary decided on the basis of the polygraph indicator that I was lying to him about the possibility of homosexuality.
I was asked to take a lie test concerning about $40,000 missing in carpets and television. I work in a carpet department, and I took this test in which they asked me a lot of questions concerning me taking items and working with someone in cahoots with someone to take televisions and carpets and things. And they asked me a lot of questions concerning other people's and told me that I was a member of Black Muslim. And all of this is not so. I'm not a member of Black Muslim, and I didn't take anything from the company. And I didn't know what I was fired for. I asked them at the company to write me, I asked him what was I fired for, he didn't tell me. They didn't anyone tell me what I was fired for. They just told me not to come to work the next day.
Privacy broke out on the front page last year when America's largest manufacturing enterprise, General Motors, investigated a 31-year-old bachelor and auto critic, Ralph Nader. When this private investigation became public news, the Senate wanted to know more about it. Here is Senator Ribicoff questioning the president of General Motors, Mr. James M. Roach. Next to him is his lawyer, Theodore Sorensen.
This investigation was initiated, conducted, and completed without my knowledge or consent, and without the knowledge or consent of any member of our governing committee. To say that I wish I had known about it earlier is an understatement, and I intend to make certain that we are informed of similar problems of this magnitude in the future.
But how widespread is it in a corporation such as yours to have people who are involved in controversies or who might make a derogatory remark about General Motors to have their entire life investigated?
An episode of this kind is certainly a very rare and unusual occurrence in General Motors.
Do you know that it is rare or unusual, or does this take place without you even realizing it?
No, sir. I would know about it if it did take place, and we have been making very careful checks to ascertain what other investigations have been made.
Just picture yourself. I know Winstead. It's a small town in the northwest section of my state. Detectives invade a small town. They go to the high school principal and start making personal inquiries about a young man of the town who went to high school. They ask questions of private citizens. They go to his boyhood friends and start asking personal questions. They go to a small town like Winstead and ask questions whether a man like Ralph Nader was anti-Semitic. They ask the question, what were his sex habits? They go into a question of his employment, who his friends were, why isn't a man like this at this age married? What grades did he get? Would you hire him? Now, it doesn't take very long for people to start repeating that, and before you know it, you have a man who has led a private and honorable life, having reflections cast upon his entire character and that of his family because of these questions that detectives, who basically aren't sensitive, ask about a man by the name of Ralph Nader, and this must be happening all over America with many other Ralph Naders.
I am not here to excuse, condone, or justify in any way.
It was a great day for privacy when the president of General Motors had to apologize publicly.
I want to apologize here and now to the members of this subcommittee and Mr. Nader. I sincerely hope that these apologies will be accepted. Certainly, I bear Mr. Nader no ill will.
We talked to Ralph Nader in Washington and asked him if he felt vindicated when Mr. Roach apologized to him last year.
Well, I think it was a desirable action on his part in order to save his company from an even more tarnished reputation than it came out with. But I don't think an act of alleged contrition is really an act of reform. The two are not synonymous. I think that any corporate head that alleges lack of awareness about what goes on in his company, when it goes on case after case and persistently over a period of years, is either not running that company properly or is being deceived by his immediate subordinates at the vice presidential level. I think that there is a routine reaction by corporate heads in this country when their company is called on the carpet for some antisocial act. The heads of the company say, we didn't know anything about it. And the people at the lower echelons either say, we didn't have responsibility or we were just taking orders. So you get a passing of the buck of the responsibility up and down and down and up, and the corporation usually emerges without the kind of disciplined accountability that it would have to be more socially responsible in the future. The business of finding out details about individuals for corporations is an extremely widespread one, very lucrative one, multi-million-dollar one. The detective who was retained by General Motors had done in the past 5 years some 25 other investigations alone for General Motors, ranging from the investigation of Danny Kaye to investigation of a Harlem civil rights group. Now, if you extrapolate that all over the country just for General Motors, I think you can reasonably assume that this company alone, since 1960, has investigated literally hundreds and hundreds of people in groups.